Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and the beta for War Within launched earlier this week. And so many players are finally getting the chance to test out their classes, try out the different hero talents, and test all of the different tier sets which are available for testing as early as this week. For today's video, I wanted to do an entire overview of every single class and spec tier set that's available for testing and go over every single one of these spec specific bonuses. As we go over the tier sets, you'll notice that all of them are fairly basic. This is on purpose to allow players for the first season as much freedom and creativity as possible to test out some of the newest class revamps and talents, give them a chance to play around and explore all of the different hero specs, and give players as much room to experiment with all the new playstyles of this expansion. And the tier sets that we'll cover will be separated by specific roles, starting with DPS classes, tanks, and then healers. And all classes based on each role will be listed in an alphabetical order. And as always, if you guys enjoyed the regular coverage of the War Within beta, make sure to follow the channel. Otherwise, let's dive right in. Starting out, we have the DPS specs, the Death Knight, both Frost and Unholy. And starting off with Frost, we have a very simple tier set. All the DPS classes are going to have a very simplified tier set, mostly just damage amps that do have some leanings towards how you may end up using them, but they're fairly generic. For Frost Death Knight, your Runic Power spending abilities deal 8% increased damage, and consuming Runic Power has a chance to increase your strength by 10% for 8 seconds. So from the start, a lot of Frost Death Knights are looking at Breathless and Dragosa as probably the best way to get a ton of Runic Power very quickly. And that's most likely where Frost Death Knights are going to go with the Season 1 tier set. There is some opportunity for Frost Strikes to make some kind of a play if you end up playing a two-handed Obliteration playstyle, since those Kill Machine procs will also fire off a free Glacial Advance, which is a Runic Power spending ability, also getting amplified by tier set, but you're most likely going to end up synergizing this together with Breathless and Dragosa. As for the spec of Unholy, your tier set is going to amp up all of your minions by 8%. When you summon a minion, your haste is increased by 2% up to 8% for 8 seconds, which as a tier set is going to have you prioritize your Undead Army builds, your Apocalypse builds, but also probably the Talent of Doom bidding, since that can consistently summon additional mages to keep amping up your tier set bonuses. Moving on, we have the Havoc Demon Hunter, which gets also a very simple tier set. Blade Dance deals 20% increased damage. Chaos Strikes deals 20% increased damage and has a chance to reset the cooldown of Blade Dance, which means as a Demon Hunter going forward, you'll be spamming Blade Dance a lot more often. I do prefer this because the ability of Chaos Strike is not nearly as valuable as Blade Dance, and getting more uses out of your Blade Dance does end up being a little bit more interactive. It can really help you synergize some insane combos inside of your Essence Break windows. Moving on from Demon Hunter, we have the Feral Druid. Tiger's Fury increases your chance to critical strike for 10 seconds, starting at 6% and increasing by 1% every 2 seconds, which already is a nice tier set that's going to amplify the amount of resources you can generate, which gives you overall more finishers, which is a feel-good playstyle overall. Your 4-piece bonus allows you critical strikes with your combo point generating abilities to increase the direct damage of your next Ferocious Bite or Primal Wrath by 15%, stacking up to 3 times. As for the Balanced Druid, your tier set is going to amplify your Star Surge damage by 8% and Starfall damage by 10%. Both lunar and solar eclipses increase the amount of astral power Wrath will generate and Starfire will generate, which basically lets you use Star Surge and Starfall a lot more often. When it comes to Devastation Evokers, we have the 2-piece that increases the damage of your Disintegrate and Pyre by 10%. Your 4 set is a little bit weird, however. Eternity Surge cooldown is decreased by 5 seconds, and it now grants Essence Burst, which is good that it grants you additional resources, which allows you to chain some interesting combos, since you can now utilize talents such as Titanic Wrath more consistently, but a shorter cooldown of your Eternity Surge can synergize naturally with talents such as Event Horizon, which further reduces its cooldown. This, under normal conditions, would be amazing when trying to extend the duration of your Dragon Rage window, but with Animosity having a cap of 16 seconds, it just makes you think that it's one of those sets that would have been amazing without the Animosity nerf, where you could extend Dragon Rage even further. But I guess the cooldown reduction simply means that you get to use the ability more often, which may give you slightly better Shattering Star windows at most. As for augmentation, your tier set is going to be more support heavy with some damage output as well. Upheaval will deal 30% increased damage and increases the damage of your next 2 eruption casts by 30%. Ebonite will increase the primary stats by additional 0.4% of your own every 2 seconds it remains active, up to 2% maximum. So it has a bit of a ramp up to it, and if you can continue the ramp up and keep it kind of chaining over and over, which is quite easy with some of the new talents added, then you can maximize the value of that Ebonite window for all the targets that you're buffing. From there on, we have the class of Hunter, starting off with Beast Mastery. For BM's tier set, Barb Shot further increases your pet's attack speed by 5 additional %. And for your 4 set, your pet's attacks have a 10% chance to increase all pet damage you deal by 10% for 10 seconds. Switching things over to Marksmanship, we have a 2 set where Arcane Shot and Multi-Shot damage is being increased by 20%, and Consuming Precise Shots, which is a talent that buffs up the damage of your Arcane Shots and Multi-Shots after using an aim shot. Consuming those procs increases the damage of your next aim shot by 10%, stacking up to 2 times. This does become a little bit awkward, however, inside of your 2-shot windows, where for the most part, marksmanship hunters usually use aim shot and rapid fire, ignoring any procs for arcane shots or multi-shots, unless they're cleaving multiple targets, for instance. And I'm wondering if this tier set may actually adjust the way that you utilize 2-shot in order to at least benefit from the tier set proc bonuses. As for survival, your 2-set bonus is going to increase the damage of your Wildfire Bomb by 5%. Raptor Strikes or Mongoose Bites will deal additional increased damage to targets affected by Wildfire Bombs, which likely means you'll not want to send all of your bombs at once, but instead chain the dot for as long as possible to give you as best of a burst window to maximize the damage of your Raptor Strikes or Mongoose Bites. Then we have the class of Mage, starting with a Spec of Fire, where Phoenix Flame's damage is being increased by 10%. This amount is increased to 25% against your primary target, which gives you a bit of cleave, but also single target potential. After dealing damage, Phoenix Flames has a 10% chance to return back to you, refunding 1% of its cooldown on Phoenix Flames, which is potentially a placeholder value, and granting you 6% increased spell damage for 10 seconds. And when testing out the 4 set to see how often the Phoenix buff procs and how often the Phoenix comes back to you to get you spell benefits, it didn't really end up procking nearly as much as I thought. This is going to be a bit of a feel it craft because I don't really have a numbers to set it behind it, but it feels somewhere in the ballpark of 30 to 40% uptime, maybe a little bit higher, but that is something they could also tune throughout the development cycle. Afterwards, we got the Frost Mage with the 2 set reads. Iceland's damage is increased by 5%, and Fingers of Frost increase the damage of your next Frozen Orb by 10%, stacking up to 10 times. With a 4 set, Frozen Orb increases Iceland's damage by 15% for 15 seconds, which means you'll want to put up as many Frozen Orbs as possible, while also generating as many Fingers of Frost as you can to create a nice gameplay loop that feeds you multiple damage procs. As for the Arcane Mage, we have a tier set that reads, Arcane Blast and Arcane Explosion damage is increased by 6%. Casting Arcane Blast or Arcane Explosion has a 10% chance to make a next Arcane Barrage, deal 10% increased damage, and generate 4 arcane charges, which is a fairly noticeable bonus when it comes to AoE content. After that, we have the Windwalker Monk with a bonus that reads, Tiger Palm increases the damage of your next melee ability by 5%. And with the way monks play around with their tier set, usually you'll have plenty of Tiger Palms followed by a Chi Spender, so Tiger Palm is going to enhance a good number of your overall abilities. Other melee abilities besides Tiger Palm increase the damage of your next Tiger Palm by 25%, stacking up to 6 times. 50% of Tiger Palm's damage is dealt onto nearby targets, with a soft cap of 5, which gives monks Tiger Palm a little bit more of that cleave and AoE potential. This also can synergize with a handful of other talents that buff the damage of Tiger Palm, like Martial Mixture, where Blackout Kicks can increase the damage of a Tiger Palm by 10%, stacking up to 12 times. From there on, we have Retribution Paladins with a tier set that reads, Blade of Justice damage is increased by 50%, and Wake of Ashes damage is increased by 10%. Wake of Ashes will also increase all damage down by 10% for 8 seconds, which will be very synergetic if you play with the talents that give you a shorter cooldown for wings. With Radiant Glory, Wake of Ashes activates Avenging Wrath for 8 seconds, about the same duration as your tier set bonus, and each Holy Power spending ability has a chance to activate Avenging Wrath for 4 additional seconds. When it comes to Shadow Priest, your tier sub bonus is going to be very basic. First of all, the duration of the Devouring Plague is being increased by 1 second. Devouring Plague also increases your damage done by 2% for 10 seconds, and multiple applications of this effect may overlap. Up next, we have the class of Rogue, starting with Assassination, which gets a very passive bonus. When he bleeds, deal damage, they have a chance to grant you a Vile Tincture for 8 seconds, increasing your poison damage by 1% per stack up to a maximum of 10 stacks. While you have 5 or more stacks of Vile Tincture, Garrote, Rupture, and Crimson Tempest deal 10% additional damage. For the Spec of Outlaw, we have a more RNG tier sub bonus, where your Sinister Strikes, Pistol Shots, and Ambushes have a 20% chance to Ethereal Rampage, dealing 15% increased damage as pure Shadow. Ethereal Rampage also additionally increases the damage of your next between the eyes by 6%, stacking up to 3 times. Finally, when it comes to the Spec of Subtlety, we have a 2-piece bonus where Symbols of Death will increase the damage of your next Secret Technique by 20%, and Secret Technique increases the damage of other finisher moves by 16% for 7 seconds. From there on, we get to move to the class of Shaman, starting off with Enhancement with a tier set that reads Storm Strike, Lava Lash, Ice Strike, and Chain Lightning deal 15% increased damage, with a 4 set extending your Feral Spirits to last 100% longer. The Elemental Shaman tier set increases the Earth Shock damage and Earthquake damage by 25%, which also applies for abilities such as Elemental Blast if you talented into it. Spending Maelstrom grants you 5% increased critical strike chance and 10% critical strike damage dealt. The critical strike damage bonus, however, doesn't really last super long. It only has roughly a 5-second duration. So once you end up using an Earth Shock or Earthquake, you'll want to unleash as many abilities as possible inside of that critical strike damage and critical strike chance window. Moving on, we have the class of Warlock, starting with Destruction. With the 2 set that reads Incinerate, critical strike chance is increased by 20%. Conflagrate's critical strike chance is also increased by 25%. The 4 set reads when Conflagrate critical strikes, your fire damage is increased by 5% for 6 seconds. This fire damage also works for your Chaos ability, since Chaos is an amalgamation of a bunch of elements together, so Chaos bolts will also get amplified by the 4 set bonus. Next, we have the Spec of Demonology with the 2 set that reads your primary demon deals 5% increased damage, and your Shadow Bolt's damage is increased by 50%. For the 4 set, Shadow Bolt has a chance to enrage your primary Felguard, increasing the damage of the next Legion Strike ability by 300%. Finally, for the Spec of Affliction, your 2 set bonus is going to amplify the damage of Malefic Rapture, increasing its damage by 5% and its critical strike chance by 10%. The 4 set makes Malefic Rapture give you a chance to increase the damage dealt by your Agony, Corruption, and Unstable Affliction by 15% for 8 seconds, which also applies for Affliction Warlocks that spec into the Hellcaller ability. They get an amplified version of Corruption called Wither. Next, we have the Warrior as the final DPS in our list, with the Fury Warrior as our first spec to take a look at. Your 2 set is going to increase the damage of your Rampage every time you press Bloodthirst. However, you cannot stack this buff multiple times. You'll only be able to get 1 stack at maximum. Your 4 set, however, is whenever Raging Blow resets its own cooldown from using the ability, the damage of your next Bloodthirst is increased by 10%, stacking up to 2 times, which means you'll want to shuffle around when you Bloodthirst and Raging Blow as you build up towards your Rampage ability. And after yet another crash later, we have ourselves the final DPS spec of the Arms Warrior, with their tier set being one where Mortal Strikes and Cleave will increase the damage of your next Overpower by 10%. In particular, this tier set bonus does not stack. So once you use Mortal Strike, you may want to cash in on your Overpower in order to gain the most value out of the base ability. The 4-piece bonus does add that when an Overpower has its cooldown reset by Tactician procs, which allows spending Rage a chance to reset the remaining cooldown of Overpower, your next Mortal Strike or Cleave has its damage increased by 10%, and critical strike chance is increased by 10%, stacking up to overall 2 times. And with DPS classes out of the way, we're going to move on to tanks, starting in alphabetical order, also with the Blood Death Knight. Just like the DPS classes, tanks are also going to have mostly passive bonuses that are actually going to be very similar to one another, though the way they activate these bonuses will be more spec specific. As for Blood Death Knights, when you have 1 or more Bone Chill charges, the damage you take is reduced by 2%, and losing a charge has a chance to reduce the damage you take by an additional 1% up to 3% maximum for 6 seconds. Your damage is increased by 1% per active Bone Shield charge, and taking damage while below 6 Bone Shield charges has a chance to generate 1 to 2 Bone Shield charges automatically, which keeps you fairly tanky and allows you to dip fairly low when it comes to your overall Bone Shield charges, which I think will be useful when utilizing talents such as Bone Storm, since this ability now will spend all of your Bone Shield charges instantly in order to use its damaging effect. Moving alphabetically, we have the Vengeance Demon Hunter, which has a bit more of an aggressive bonus. Soul Cleave deals 50% increased damage, and has a 35% chance to shatter one lesser soul fragment from a target it hits. Consuming a soul fragment increases the damage and healing of your next spell devastation by 2% up to 30%, which allows you to have more powerful defensive cooldowns of Fel Dev with additional damage and resources from Soul Cleave. For Guardian Druid, your tier set is going to allow you to play into more of the physical damage playstyle, but also into some of the more arcane hybrid builds as well. Your Thrash and Moonfire increases your damage done and reduce damage you take by 1% for 8 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Both Thrash and Moonfire will build the same buff of Guardian Tenacity, whether you end up going into a more Moonfire heavy build or in a more Thrash heavy build. The Foresight increases the damage of your arcane abilities by 5% and bleed damage you deal by 5%, which sounds like a simple damage buff, but since your arcane abilities can actually heal you for a portion of damage done, or provide a shield based on a bleed of Thrash for instance, this does provide some form of a defensive benefit on top of it. When it comes to Brewmaster, I find that their tier set is a little bit more interactive. Blackout Kick and Keck Smash deal 20% additional damage, and Shuffle now also grants you 3% damage reduction. Shuffle being a talent that offers you passive mitigation, which generally increases the value of your stagger, which helps smooth out all damage taken, but now with a nice extra damage reduction bonus. The Foresight also causes Blackout Kick to increase your damage dealt by 1% for 15 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Blackout Kick also has a chance to reset the cooldown of Keck Smash and make its next cast cost no energy, which is actually kind of valuable since one, Keck Smash does quite a bit of damage, but also Keck Smash is a great way for you to reduce the remaining cooldown of most of your brew abilities by 3 seconds. This includes basic mitigation brew such as Purifying Brew, as well as Celestial Brew, but also some of the more longer lasting cooldowns such as your Fortifying Brew. From there we get to move on to Paladin, starting with Protection, where we have a 2-set that allows Shield of the Righteousness to deal 10% additional damage and grant 3% damage reduction. Casting a Holy Power ability increases the damage and healing that you would deal with your next Avenging Wrath by 0.5%, and this effect stacks. However, currently this tier set is a little bit on a weird spot because it doesn't seem to proc consistently. Like if you're using the abilities such as Shield of the Righteous, which does cost Holy Power, it doesn't proc the bonus, but casting Word of Glory does. I'm sure this is something that's going to be fixed in the future, but yes, this effect can continue stacking, which then further will increase the value of your next Avenging Wrath. Now the question is, what's the maximum stacks? Is what I'm trying to find out now. Okay, so there is apparently a cap. You have no idea. I spent an ungodly amount of time just hitting Word of Glory after collecting some Holy Power, and it turns out this tier set does have a cap of 99. So once I press Wings, I get a measly 49.5% additional damage and healing on my next Wings. This took a little too long, and after this segment, I feel like I need a break. And after taking a small break from the Paladin segment, we move on into Protection Warrior. Your 2-set bonus reads, when Shield Slam cooldown is reset by Strategist, you gain Expert Strategist buff, increasing the damage of your Shield Slam by 5% and reducing all damage taken by 3% for 6 seconds. Shield Slam resets quite often, so this should be a fairly regularly achieved bonus. Your 4-set reads, Shield Slam critical strikes increase the damage dealt by your Thunderclap and Revenge by 10% for 8 seconds. And when you do get the brutal follow-up buff, it isn't consumed every time you use either one of your Revenge or Thunderclaps. Just for the extension of the buff, you get simply a damage amp, which is quite an awesome benefit. And with tanks out of the way, we can now move on to talking about the healer tier set bonuses, which just like tanks and healers for the most part, most of them are going to be passive, though some are going to be a little bit more interactive. Like with the Restoration Druid, we have a tier set bonus that's a bit more passive, with Regrowth, Wild Growth, and Swiftmend being increased by 10%. Your healing is increased by 8% when consuming Soul of the Forest bonus, and for 6 seconds afterwards. Soul of the Forest being a fairly standard talent that's basically a cornerstone of just about every single Restoration Druid build. Continuing alphabetically, we have the Preservation Evoker, with a tier set bonus where Reversion and Emerald Blossom will heal an injured ally within 30 yards for 10% of any amount healed. The 4 set reads, Verdant Embrace increases the healing of your next Reversion by 200%, Reversion being one of your basic healing over time effects. This effect can also be spread amongst multiple allies with the main mechanic of Echo, which allows you to put echoes on targets, and when you use your next healing ability, that effect can be copied for up to 100% full value on all allies with the Echo, which can give you a situation where you use your Verdant Embrace and then set up a very strong reversion across an entire raid group, which I imagine could get some decent overall value. From there on, we have the Mistweaver Monk with the tier set that reads, Envelop in Mist and Renew Mist healing is increased by 10%. Vivify will extend the duration of both Renew in Mist and Envelop in Mist on its primary target by 2 seconds with up to 4 seconds maximum. From there on, we have the Holy Paladin with a fairly passive tier set. Holy Shock's healing is increased by 10% and its cooldown is reduced by 10%. Holy Shock increases the initial healing of your next Word of Glory or Light of Dawn by 8%, stacking up to 4 times. From here we have the 2 specs of Priest, starting with Holy. For Holy tier set 2-piece bonus, your Serendipity is 10% more effective. Serendipity being a Holy Priest passive, where casting Flash Heal or Heal helps reduce the remaining cooldown of Holy Word Serenity. Prayer of Healing and other spells help reduce the cooldown of Holy Word Sanctify, and Smite and other offensive spells help reduce the remaining cooldown of Holy Word Chastise. With your 4 set Heal, Flash Heal, and Prayer of Healing have a 50% chance to be cast again, but at 35% effectiveness. As for the Discipline Priest, your 2 set increases the value of Atonement Healing by 5 additional %. With the 4 set Smite and Penance, increase the damage of your next Mind Blast by 25%, or the absorb amount of your next Power Word Shield by 15%, stacking up to 3 times. And to finish things up, we have the Restoration Shaman, with a tier set that reads, Tidal Wave increases the healing of the affected spell by 10%. Tidal Wave being a passive that allows casting Riptide to grant you 2 stacks of Tidal Waves. And Tidal Waves will reduce the cast time of your next healing wave or chain heal by 64%, or increase the critical strike chance of your next healing surge by 30%. With the 4 set, Tidal Wave is 80% more effective and reduces the mana cost of your affected spell by 8%. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.